Emotional detachment is not just a romantic inconvenience, it's a psychological rupture. When someone you care for begins to withdraw, like subtly, then completely, it disturbs the structure you've built in your mind and heart. It disrupts your perception of security, of connection, and more deeply, of identity. Today, we are going to examine what emotional detachment actually means. Not just how it feels, but what it represents in the deeper layers of the human experience. And more importantly, how you begin the painful but necessary task of detaching from someone who no longer values you. When you're emotionally invested in someone, their presence becomes part of your emotional framework. Their absence, therefore, doesn't just leave a space. It creates a vacuum, a destabilizing pull that you feel physically and psychologically. And in that vacuum, we often hear our deepest insecurities echo the loudest. Your entire nervous system reacts to this change. You may find yourself ruminating more, losing sleep, or replaying conversations over and over. Not because you're irrational, but because your brain is trying to restore a sense of safety that used to be provided by emotional closeness. This process is entirely human, and also where your opportunity for transformation begins. Detachment is not an event, it is a process. Gradual, almost imperceptible at first. A slow erosion of connection. One day, their text replies become shorter. The next, they forget the details you once shared. Eventually, you begin to realize you're speaking into a void. And that's when the silence becomes louder than any argument ever could. This is not just a breakdown in communication. It's the manifestation of emotional absence. A partner who is physically there but psychologically absent becomes a ghost, haunting the living fabric of the relationship. And make no mistake, this absence has weight. It pulls at you, distorts your reality, and leads you to question your intuition. One of the cruel paradoxes of emotional detachment is that it's often denied. When you try to bring it up, you may be told you're too sensitive, reading into things, or simply imagining the problem. This gaslighting, unintentional or not, erodes your confidence in your own perception. And this perhaps is the most dangerous part of detachment. It undermines your trust in yourself. This is why identifying detachment early is vital. Because the longer you stay in a state of emotional ambiguity, the more damage is done. Not just to the relationship, but to your sense of psychological coherence. The longer you wait for the other person to return emotionally, the more your identity becomes entangled with the act of waiting. And that is not love. That is erosion. In this phase, it's essential to start documenting what you're experiencing, not just externally, the words they say or don't say, but internally. What do you feel in your body when they enter the room? What thoughts do you suppress to keep the peace? What patterns are you starting to notice but haven't admitted out loud? The moment you begin to write these things down, to name them, you interrupt the silent erosion. You start to make the implicit explicit. You step out of confusion and into awareness. And awareness, while painful, is always the first step toward freedom. Emotional detachment does more than hurt. It disorients. And at the center of that disorientation is your identity. When the person who once made you feel seen, heard, and understood begins to emotionally vanish, you don't just feel rejected. You begin to question whether you were ever truly known. This is the internal implosion. Not only do you grieve the loss of the relationship, you grieve the version of yourself that existed within it. The brain is wired to seek patterns and narratives. When someone pulls away from us, we attempt to maintain a sense of control by filling in the blanks. We begin to ask questions like, did I change? Did I say something wrong? Was I too much, not enough? And the mind, desperate for answers, often settles on the most punishing ones, even if they aren't true. This is where emotional detachment becomes more than relational decay. It becomes a psychological crisis. Because when your value is being questioned from the outside, and you begin to internalize that doubt, the integrity of your self-concept begins to fracture. And this is the tragedy. People will lose themselves trying to hold on to someone who is already halfway out the door. You start walking on eggshells. You begin censoring your emotions, making yourself smaller, quieter, easier, all in the hope that doing so will bring them back. But that strategy always backfires, because love that is contingent on silence or self-erasure is not love. It's control. Real identity is not formed in appeasement. It's forged in truth. And that truth often begins in pain. Pain that says, you've been dishonoring yourself to preserve something that is already unraveling. It's time to ask different questions. Not how can I fix this, but who have I become in trying to fix this? Not how do I make them love me again, but do I even love the version of me I've become in this relationship? Because identity isn't just something we discover, it's something we either betray or protect. Every time you ignore what hurts, every time you silence your needs, you're not just tolerating someone else's behavior, you're shaping your own sense of self-worth around neglect. But it doesn't have to stay that way. This moment, painful and unclear as it may be, is the birthplace of a more grounded identity. One that is no longer determined by someone else's ability to choose you, but by your willingness to choose yourself. And that's where the real shift begins, when your identity stops orbiting around someone else's presence and starts anchoring in your own truth. Pain is not your enemy. Pain, when it arises in response to emotional detachment, is not a flaw in your system. It's a signal that your system is working. It is alerting you to a breach in your values, your needs, or your sense of belonging. The real danger is not in the pain itself, but in how we interpret and respond to it. We are conditioned to associate pain with weakness, especially in relationships. We tell ourselves, if I were stronger, this wouldn't hurt. If I were secure, I wouldn't care this much. But that's a profound misunderstanding of what pain represents. Pain, properly understood, is not a measurement of fragility. It is a reflection of depth. You are in pain because you care, because you were invested, because it mattered. That's what makes detachment so disorienting. It's not just the loss of the other person's presence, right? It's the internal war between your desire to hold on and your growing realization that doing so is costing you your peace. Pain sits right in that tension. It demands attention. It refuses to let you sleepwalk through your suffering. The mistake we often make is trying to silence that pain too quickly. We numb it, avoid it, distract ourselves. But pain that is ignored doesn't disappear. It festers. It grows into resentment, self-doubt, bitterness, or desperation. And these things are far more damaging than the original wound. Pain, when engaged with honestly, becomes data. It tells you where the wound is. It reveals what boundary was crossed, what expectation was unmet, what core need was neglected. It is your mind's way of inviting you back to the scene of the original abandonment. Not to relive it, but to reclaim your voice within it. Instead of asking, why does it still hurt? Try asking, what is this pain trying to teach me? Maybe it's showing you that your needs were never truly honored. Maybe it's reminding you that your silence didn't protect you. It only delayed the confrontation. Maybe it's telling you that the version of love you accepted was never love at all. The transformation begins when you stop trying to escape the pain and start listening to it. You sit with it. You write about it. You speak it out loud in safe spaces. You treat it not as an intruder, but as a messenger, and eventually a guide. And as you do this work, something remarkable happens. You begin to integrate the lessons. You become more discerning, more anchored, less easily swayed by emotional inconsistency. You recognize the red flags earlier. You learn to leave before your self-respect is compromised. That's how pain stops being suffering and becomes wisdom. This is the point where many people, especially those who love deeply, fall into a psychological trap. They confuse attachment with love. And the distinction is not just semantic, it's existential. Attachment is driven by fear of loss, fear of abandonment, fear of emptiness. It creates a dependency that disguises itself as devotion. It clings not because it's rooted in connection, but because it's terrified of disconnection. Love, in contrast, is grounded in presence, in respect, in mutual regard. It grows in the soil of choice, not compulsion. It doesn't need to cling because it flows freely. It gives without tallying receipts, and it receives without guilt or coercion. The trouble arises when our early emotional wounds condition us to equate emotional turbulence with emotional depth. If your nervous system was trained to interpret unpredictability as normal, if love was modeled as something you have to earn, chase, or prove, then healthy love can feel boring. Stable love can feel unsafe. And that's a dangerous inversion of truth. You begin to confuse the adrenaline of chaos for the intimacy of care. You mistake anxiety for passion. You mistake inconsistency for mystery. And you stay, not because you are loved, but because your inner child still believes they can fix the dynamic that hurt them long ago. The psychological term for this is repetition compulsion. We recreate familiar emotional environments in adulthood because they're familiar, even if they're harmful. We replay the same roles, hoping for a different ending. And in doing so, we delay the real healing that only begins when we choose different. Attachment in its unhealthy form whispers lies. It says, "Without them, I am nothing." It says, "If they leave, I'll fall apart." And eventually it says, "This must be love because I've never hurt like this before." But real love doesn't destabilize you. It doesn't keep you guessing. It doesn't demand that you abandon your boundaries to maintain the bond. In fact, real love honors those boundaries. It makes you feel safer in your body, clearer in your mind, and more connected to your spirit. Ask yourself, when you're with them, do you feel expanded or diminished? Are you growing into yourself or shrinking to fit into them? Are you staying because you're deeply seen or questioning, or because you're afraid of being alone? The answers to these questions won't just reveal the truth of your relationship. They'll reveal the truth of your attachment style. And with that truth, you can begin to rewire the story you tell yourself about what love is supposed to feel like. Because love that demands the death of your inner world is not love. It's emotional survival. And you are meant for so much more than just surviving. Boundaries are not walls. They are not punishments. They are not ultimatums. Boundaries are clarity. They are the lines that define where you end and someone else begins. They are the architecture of your self-respect. In emotionally draining relationships, especially those marked by detachment or inconsistency, boundaries are often the first thing to erode. You start accepting behaviors you once said you'd never tolerate. You make excuses. You give second chances. Not because you're weak, but because you're hopeful. And hope, unguarded by discernment, can be dangerous. The courage to set boundaries starts with one radical shift. Deciding that your peace matters more than their comfort. That your needs are not negotiable. That being kind does not mean being endlessly accommodating. So what does that look like in practice? It looks like saying, "I will not continue this conversation if I'm being disrespected." It looks like not replying to emotional manipulation or silent treatment. It looks like walking away, not as an act of anger, but as an act of self-preservation. And yes, it's terrifying, especially if you're someone who was conditioned to earn love by being agreeable, quiet, or flexible. If your survival once depended on being liked or not causing trouble, then asserting your limits will feel like danger. Your nervous system might scream, "You're pushing them away." But the truth is, people who love you won't leave because you've set a boundary. They'll listen, they'll adjust, or they'll reveal that the connection was conditional all along. Boundaries will filter your life. They will repel the people who only came to take. They will irritate those who depended on your silence. But they will also attract those who respect your voice, who want to meet you in the middle, who see your strength and respond not with retreat, but with responsibility. And here's the deeper psychological truth. Every time you enforce a boundary, you are telling your subconscious, "I am worthy of respect." You're reinforcing self-trust. You're proving to yourself that you're no longer willing to abandon your truth for the sake of connection. You don't have to be loud to be clear. You don't have to be confrontational to be firm, but you do have to decide, with your words, your actions, and your energy, that you are no longer available for relationships that drain, diminish, or destabilize you. Because the moment you begin to protect your inner world with boundaries, you stop being available to people who benefit from your lack of them. And in that shift, you don't just reclaim your peace, you begin to embody it. When a relationship breaks down, especially one in which your emotional energy was deeply invested, there is a subtle but devastating loss that often goes unspoken. The erosion of your identity. It starts slowly. You stop doing the things that brought you joy because they don't fit your partner's preferences. You silence your voice to avoid conflict. You dull your brilliance so their insecurities don't flare. You wake up one day and realize you've become a supporting character in your own life. To reclaim your identity is not to reject the relationship's history, but to refuse to remain small in the name of maintaining it. It is to say, I remember who I am, and I will not abandon her again. Identity reclamation begins with confrontation, facing the truth that you have compromised your essence for the illusion of peace. And that illusion? It was never real peace. It was compliance. It was survival. It was you trying to keep the connection alive, even if it meant killing parts of yourself. The real work begins in the quiet moments. The walks alone where you listen to your own thoughts again. The journaling sessions that uncover forgotten dreams. The discomfort of solitude that slowly blossoms into sovereignty. You reclaim your identity not through grand gestures, but through daily acts of remembering, rebuilding, rerooting. You take back your mornings, you reclaim your choices. You make space for your voice to return. Not loud at first, but steady. This process is terrifying because it reintroduces you to your unmet needs. It exposes where you settled, and yet, in that same exposure, it gives you the sacred gift of becoming your own anchor. Your sense of self is no longer outsourced to how they treat you. It becomes internal, intact, independent. When you reclaim your identity, you stop asking, "Am I good enough for them?" and start asking, "Are they aligned with who I've fought to become?" This shift changes everything. You move from scarcity to discernment, from desperation to direction, from waiting to choosing. And as your sense of self returns, so does your strength. Not the kind of strength that proves something to the world, but the quiet, rooted kind that no longer needs external permission to exist. This is the path back to yourself. And it's not easy, but it's worth everything. One of the most disorienting aspects of emotional detachment isn't just the distance you feel. It's the illusion you're still clinging to. The fantasy of what the relationship could be, what it used to be, what you hoped it might become if you just tried a little harder. This fantasy isn't harmless. It's a sedative, a coping mechanism, a shield against the truth that maybe, just maybe, you've outgrown the version of yourself that needed this relationship to feel whole. The mind is a powerful architect of denial. It selectively edits reality to preserve the narrative that kept you safe. You remember the rare good days, the early affection, the potential. You replay those moments like they're proof that it was love, that it could be again. Meanwhile, you minimize the late-night arguments, the absence of empathy, the way your nervous system braced itself every time their tone shifted. Let's be clear, nostalgia is not evidence. Hope is not a strategy. And love, real love, doesn't require you to pretend you're not in pain just to preserve the image of connection. Breaking the fantasy means confronting the uncomfortable truth that your emotional attachment may be to an idea, not a reality. And that idea, that illusion, was beautiful, yes. But it wasn't mutual, it wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't real in the way your heart needed it to be. The tragedy of clinging to a fantasy is that it blinds you to the truth of what's actually happening. You rationalize the distance. You internalize the silence. You tell yourself, they're just going through something, or if I show them more love, they'll come back. But love doesn't live in performance. It lives in presence, in reciprocity, in emotional safety. So why do we hold on so tightly? Because the fantasy is familiar, and familiarity, even when it's painful, is predictable. Predictability feels safer than facing the terrifying unknown of what comes after letting go. But here's the deeper truth. Every moment you invest in defending the fantasy is a moment you delay your healing. Every time you excuse mistreatment in the name of love, you reinforce the lie that your worth is conditional. That if you just become easier to love, then maybe, just maybe, they'll finally see you. That's not love. That's self-abandonment dressed as loyalty. To break the fantasy is to wake up from the trance. It is to say, I will not keep bleeding for a story that only I'm still telling. It is to replace longing with lucidity. It is to remember that real connection does not require you to disappear. And yes, this awakening hurts. It burns away illusions you've built your emotional safety around. But in the ashes of that fantasy, something sacred can begin. Self-honesty. You stop asking, why don't they love me the way I love them? And start asking, why have I stayed in something that demands I betray myself? That shift is where power returns, where vision sharpens, where you stop hoping they'll change and start choosing to change the story you're telling yourself. Because the truth is, you don't need closure to walk away from a fantasy. You need clarity. And clarity comes not from analyzing them, but from finally hearing you. Healing from emotional detachment is not a straight line. It doesn't unfold in tidy stages, nor does it obey the calendar. Healing is a spiral, sometimes rising, sometimes looping back, sometimes standing still. One day you feel empowered, and the next you wake up with a pit in your stomach, grieving all over again. That's not regression. That's reality. That's healing. Let go of the expectation that you should be over it by now. You're not broken. You're processing. The grief isn't just about them. It's about the version of you that believed in the fantasy, that hoped, that stayed, that tried. You're grieving not only a person, but the piece of yourself that fought to keep something alive, that couldn't love you back. Some days you'll feel angry. Let yourself rage, not in destruction, but in release. Other days you'll feel numb. Let yourself rest, not in avoidance, but in self-preservation. Healing requires that you stop asking, how do I fix this? And start asking, what does this pain want me to know? It asks you to listen, to witness your own heartbreak without turning away, to hold your hand through the trembling, to be the parent you never had, patient, kind, unconditionally present. And here's the paradox, you cannot force healing. You can only create the conditions in which healing becomes possible. And those conditions are built on honesty, slowness, boundaries, self-compassion, and truth. Some people will tell you to move on. Ignore them. Some will ask why you're still talking about it. Let them wonder. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your speed. The healing process is yours, not theirs, not his, not society's. And certainly not the timeline your shame tries to impose. Keep going, even when it's quiet, even when it's hard, especially then. Because healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming whole. There is a silent contract in many relationships, often unspoken, yet deeply embedded. It says, if you validate me, I will feel worthy. If you show up, I will feel safe. If you love me, I will know who I am. And when that contract is broken, when the other person withdraws, the devastation isn't just about losing them. It's about losing the mirror you were using to see yourself. But here's the truth. Emotional self-sufficiency is not about isolation. It's not about building walls so high that no one can touch you. It's about remembering that you are the architect of your own internal world. If your sense of worth rises and falls with someone else's presence, you are outsourcing your soul to something fragile, something unpredictable. That's not intimacy. That's dependency. And dependency dressed as love will always feel like walking a tightrope. One wrong step, and everything collapses. Becoming emotionally self-sufficient is not a rejection of love. It's the foundation of being able to love without losing yourself in the process. It starts with radical self-awareness. You begin to notice the moments you look outward for validation, the way you anxiously scan for signs of approval, the fear that creeps in when someone pulls away, not because they're leaving, but because your identity is entangled with their gaze. You start asking questions like, who am I when no one is affirming me? What do I believe about myself when there's no one to perform for? Can I be okay in the silence? This internal work is not glamorous. It's not what you see in movies. It's messy. It's lonely. It's staring at your reflection and deciding, without applause, that you matter. Not because someone told you so, but because you finally believe it. Emotional self-sufficiency also means taking responsibility for your emotional responses. Yes, people can hurt you. Yes, trauma is real. But if you hand someone else the keys to your peace, they will drive you wherever they please, and not always where you need to go. This is the psychological equivalent of sovereignty. It's the process of untangling your worth from their whims, of becoming emotionally bilingual, fluent in your own needs and not dependent on someone else to translate them for you. You learn to self-soothe, to regulate, to meet your own gaze in the mirror and say, I've got you. Does this mean you'll never need anyone? Nope. Humans are relational beings. We're wired for connection. But there's a difference between wanting someone and needing them to survive. The former allows freedom. The latter breeds fear. When you're emotionally self-sufficient, your relationships stop being lifelines and start becoming shared journeys. You're not grabbing on to avoid drowning. You're swimming side by side. Interdependent, not codependent. And perhaps most importantly, emotional self-sufficiency gives you the power to walk away. Not in bitterness, but in clarity. You stop clinging to people who breadcrumb you because you're no longer starving for scraps. You've learned to feed your own soul. This is the path forward. It's the transition from, I need you to complete me, to, I am complete, and I choose you. If you choose to meet me in fullness. And that is real love. Not the kind that keeps you begging, but the kind that honors your wholeness. Now, if you've made it this far, then let me tell you, you're already doing the work. You're confronting something most people spend years trying to avoid. The hard truths about themselves, their patterns, their pain. You're not numbing, you're not running, you're choosing awareness. And that alone puts you on a higher path. So here's the summary. Emotional detachment, though painful, is often the symptom, not the disease. It reflects unmet needs, power imbalances, lost respect, and the erosion of genuine love. Recognizing detachment is not weakness, it's insight. And that insight is a call to act in your own defense, to act in protection of your dignity, to act as the steward of your emotional life. What we've explored isn't just theory, it's a mirror. And in that mirror, maybe you've seen parts of yourself you've ignored. Maybe you've felt things you weren't ready to name. But now you have language. And that is where transformation begins. Take the insights from this journey and begin small. Start by noticing how you feel, what you accept, what you hide, what you fear. Then start aligning your words with your needs, your boundaries with your values, your relationships with your worth. This video, this voice is not your savior. It's a spark. The work is yours. And you're capable of it. If you found value here, I encourage you to leave a comment. Tell me, what part of this hit home? What are you walking away with today? I read everyone. Subscribe for more content that's not just soft motivation, but hard truth spoken with compassion. Like, share, send it to someone who needs it. Because healing doesn't happen in silence, it happens in truth. And you're already on your way. See you in the next one.